Another grand jury has decided not to indict another police officer in the shooting of another unarmed black man. This time, the story coming out of Houston, Texas. The grand jury decided not to indict Officer Juventino Castro, who was off duty and working a private security job at a strip mall when he fatally shot 26-year-old Jordan Baker. It happened in January. Again tonight, a grand jury has decided not to indict the officer in that shooting. Well, meanwhile, New York City's mayor has asked for protesters to stop demonstrating until after the funerals of two New York City officers shot to death execution style on Saturday. Tonight, protesters said no, with a new large protest on the streets of New York. RT correspondent Alexey Yaroshevsky is in New York with the latest.
On Monday, New York Mayor de Blasio told that the protesters should not hold their rallies until the two cops who were shot dead in Brooklyn would be buried, which happens this Saturday. And what we can see and hear now here in the streets of New York is a definite no from the protesters. In fact, they took the people out to the streets again to show that they have nothing to do with the act of madness in Brooklyn, with the two cops being the victims of it. Now, many have already tried to pin the blame on Eric Garner protesters for the deaths of the two policemen, but the message here is that it is not. And the chants that the people are saying here have not changed the slightest. They're still demanding justice for Eric Garner, Mike Brown. They still demand resignation of NYPD Commissioner Bratton. And this is what we've been hearing over the past several months. Now, the biggest intrigue here is how the relationships between the protesters and the police will build on from now. Because when I arrived to the crime scene in Brooklyn on Saturday, I saw how tense, angry and distraught policemen were there. Right now, it's really peaceful. There hasn't been any acts of violence or aggression from either side. And this is what we've been seeing over the past several months. Both the cops and the protesters have shown a lot of restraint. The biggest question, of course, is whether they will continue to do so, because some among the cops have been trying to pin the blame on the protesters, particularly the union of NYPD patrolmen, who have been saying that the protesters are to blame for the deaths of two policemen. So far, again, it's been peaceful, several hundred people marching the streets, but we have to wait and see whether that will be the case. Alexey Yaroshevsky, RT, reporting from New York City.
And to talk more about those protests, I'm joined by Alexey Yaroshevsky, who is live in our studio in New York. And Alexey, you just got back from filing that report. Right now, those protesters are still on the street in New York, are they not?
Yes, they're still marching towards Harlem through Park Avenue, as far as I could tell from their online feeds. And it is still very peaceful, and there have been no confrontations between the protesters and the police. But I can tell you, I've been covering these protests for the better half of the last 2 or 3 months, and there's something different about this protest this time. It seems that the policemen they're sort of, the mood is different among them. Of course, after they lost two of their own, they're not as cheerful and as friendly as they usually are. But again, as I've said, it looks calm and peaceful at the moment, and the protesters are still marching up towards Harlem in New York City.
It is fairly interesting that Mayor de Blasio had asked protesters not to hold these protests, and my understanding is some of the protesters were actually angered by that, felt like the city was essentially using the deaths of these officers as a way to shut down not just their right to protest and speech, but also to kind of quash their message. Were you hearing that tonight?
Indeed, the anger of the protesters on the streets tonight was not particularly about Mayor de Blasio. In fact, some of them have been saying how the mayor reached out to them, and even his first words after the grand jury decision, the decision which infuriated many, came out. His first words actually appeased many protesters, but the main anger of the protesters right now is that those who are, as I've said before in that report, are trying to pin the blame for the deaths of two officers on them, particularly the PBA, one of the largest policemen unions in the New York City, who are openly saying that the death of the two policemen lays on the protesters, and they're also saying that the deaths of those policemen, the blood of those policemen, is on the hands of the New York City mayor. So you see, there's a lot of poisonous politics happening right now, with the difficult love and hate triangle between the protesters, the mayor, and the police.
About how many people were out there, Alexey? We're short on time, but about how many people were out there, and do you expect to see more protests in the next couple of days with the holiday just around the corner?
I would say there were between 200 and 300 people, and the number was growing as it proceeded. And we asked the people whether they will be protesting more. There's no clear indication that they will be taking people out into the streets. But then again, they sometimes do it spontaneously, unplanned, and we, of course, be monitoring every developments on that.
RT correspondent Alexey Yaroshevsky from our New York studio, thanks so much for your time and your reporting on this tonight.